Most people find the thought of recording themselves awkward, and although they can normally speak well and string along a conversation, the moment a microphone's placed in front of them, they gum up and fall over their thoughts, and suddenly a normal, congruent speaking style becomes a ramble of mismatched thoughts full of stammers, ums and ahs, and you'd never think that it was the same person speaking, all because there's a microphone in front of them. This is what we want to get past with a little bit of practice. Practice makes perfect, and with the recording practice, you will learn what you can leave, what has to be edited out, and what you need to repeat and re-record. All these things will help you when you finally come to the crunch and do the real recording. So start practicing, start recording, start playing around, and don't worry if it's broken. You'll improve. And it's best to improve with practice rather than doing all your preparation and then turning on the recorder for the serious business where you have less time to make mistakes. There are all sorts of little things that you're going to discover during that practice period that you'll be able to use so much more efficiently when you turn the recorder on. Now, this is really important if you're going to be getting in front of somebody else and you don't want to stuff them around too much. So that's why it's important, even if you're doing this with somebody else, that you practice recording yourself, because the same skills are involved. But what are you going to use for content? I suggest that you practice with real content. Use real stories. This will help to improve your memory of those stories. It'll take you back to those times. It'll help to flush them out in your memory. As you think them through, you'll be reminded of additional stories to mention later. Keep some notes. Scribble some notes down as you're going, so that as your memory gets jogged, you'll be going, oh, I can talk about that as well, and then I can add this in there as well, and scribble these notes down, and then you'll get more content that you can use when it actually comes time to do the proper recording. The great thing also about using real content is during this practice period, you're actually producing valid content, stuff that can really be used. And if something unfortunate was to happen, at least you've got real content, just in case. To record yourself, first up, we need to create a mental state that takes us to where we'll be able to speak as though someone else was in conversation with us. Then the conversation will flow easily, as if they're just sitting there quietly listening. Here's a bit of an example from my past. Parachuting was one of the most significant parts of my life for many reasons. It all started way back in 1968 when I was only 8 years old. I used to watch this TV show called Ripcord with my dad. It was a classic old show. It was where, the good guys are chasing the bad guys and getting into all sorts of tricky situations and saving the girl or the kitten. It's all the same sort of stuff that they use nowadays. But this time they were using the methodology of skydiving. Well, parachuting anyway. There was a little bit of skydiving, but it was more parachuting. And I remember my dad turned around one day to me and he said, one day I'd like to do that. And I remember thinking to myself, one day I'm going to do that. I never forgot either. And even though I was only 8 years old then, I remember just putting it away in the back of my mind that one day when I get older, I'm going to go parachuting. Somewhere along the line, I got this idea in my head that I could start doing it at about 16 years of age. And I remember when I turned 16, I turned around to my mum and I said, hey, Mum, did you know that I'm now old enough to start parachuting? And she said, well, that's not going to happen, is it? So a couple more years went by and I'd started working and I was doing my apprenticeship. And I went to the World Parachuting Championships, not far from where I was living at the time. And I hung around there for a couple of weekends and watched all these people, and I was so excited by seeing them landing and seeing the free fall formations. I really got invigorated by it. And a couple of months later, I was thinking, I've got no real activity on the weekend. I ought to do something. And, well, why don't I try parachuting? I'll give that a shot. So I made a few phone calls and I rung around and I eventually found a drop zone nearby where I could go. But I needed parental consent because I was not yet 18 years old. And I thought, okay, this is no worries. I'll go and ask my mum. Hey, Mum, can I have parental consent so I can go skydiving? And she went, no. I didn't raise you to be nearly 18 years of age just for you to jump out of an aeroplane and kill yourself. She refused me. So I went, okay. Hey, Dad, can I have parental consent so I can start parachuting? And he went, yeah, no worries. Where is it? Okay, here, scribble, scribble, scribble. And he signed it for me. Anyway, so I got my parental consent and I trotted on down to the drop zone and I started my training. I told my mum and dad and I said, hey, don't worry, and this is true. I said, from what I understood, I said, it's going to take me weeks and weeks of training of theory and ground practice and all sorts of stuff, harness work. It'll take me weeks of practice before I actually do it. So I went along for the first Saturday, started the training, and on Sunday evening I came home to tell my parents that I'd just done 4 parachute jumps. It all happened in one weekend. And I remember Dad was very nonchalant about it. Unfortunately, Mum was a bit concerned for my welfare, but she knew that I'd started, and it was the start of a long history of parachuting for many years after that. So that was a little story from my past. So how did I tell you that story? Well, it's quite simple, really. I just imagined if my daughter, and this is the important thing, my daughter had turned around to me and said, "Hey, Dad, why did you start skydiving?" And then I started, and this is what you heard. Parachuting was one of the most significant parts of my life, for many reasons. It all started. And the reason I said that like that is if we were having a conversation with somebody else in a two-way situation, you might ask the other person, "So why did you start skydiving?" And they would just go, "Well, when I was 8 years old in 1968. But if we start and we're recording just ourselves and we start with that start of the story, when I was 8 years old in 1968, it doesn't make any sense. You really need to have the introduction. And the introduction of saying what I said before is as though somebody else was to ask the question. So what you're doing is you're creating a statement to lead into the story that you're about to say, in lieu of the question that the interviewer would ask of you. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in this situation, I've started off with a little phrase to start. Parachuting was one of the most significant parts of my life for many reasons. It all started when I was 8 years old in 1968. That gets us into the flow of it. It's less necessary to do that if you've got somebody engaging with the conversation and making it a true conversation. So that's what I did initially. I started off with my daughter in my head asking me a question. I then started with a leading statement. Remember, these can be edited out where is appropriate. So you can speak and ramble on as much as you like. You could start muttering on. You could actually say, okay, the question that I would be asked would be, "Hey, Dad, why did you start skydiving?" Parachuting was one of them, and you could then go into it like that. Remember, we can chop all this out as we see fit later on in the editing process. So don't worry about it and just get a bit of a feel for how to create a story with a lead-in. I then basically just followed the classic old storytelling process. I just started talking. Nothing too special about that.